Welcome to Watercolor Geodes, Exploration of Shape. I am Serena Rios McCrae, watercolorist and digital artist based in Tucson, Arizona. I am passionate about teaching watercolor because of the healing and cathartic nature of the medium. Watercolor, when explored with creative freedom, is relaxing and beneficial for the mind, body, and spirit. In this lesson, I will share some essential watercolor techniques with you and encourage you to enjoy watercoloring with freedom and mindfulness. Before we get started, let's talk about watercolor supplies. So the first thing that you're going to need is your watercolor paper. Simple watercolor papers are readily available. My favorite is the Canson XL paper, which can be found at Michael's, craft stores, and on the internet. If you're beginning, you're going to want to start out with cold press watercolor paper. The next thing you're going to need is your watercolor palette. There are many different kinds, ranging in lots of prices, and I will give you a look into all the different styles in a minute. The third most important and essential item is your watercolor brush. My favorite type of brush and the most readily available is a simple round brush with a point. You're also going to need some type of towel or paper towel. I use a regular kitchen towel, which I can reuse and wash. You can also use a paper towel. If you use paper towel, you'll want it about 3 layers thick. And it comes with the name. You'll also need some water. I like to use 2 cups of water, and I'll explain to you why. Let's take a look at some types of watercolor palettes. So the most readily available watercolor is our typical Crayola or Rose Art palette, which we can find at any grocery store. There is also this craft grade watercolor palette, which can be found at craft stores and online. If you have tube watercolors, you can use a ceramic dish or a plate, and all you have to do is squeeze the paints out into little dollops, mix in water, and then you're ready to go. There are also travel palettes, which are absolutely fantastic. They come in these tins which fold out. You'll see that when you fold out the lids, they can also double as mixing palettes, which is really, really nice if you're on the go. These small limited colored palettes are one of my favorites. There are also options if you get more involved to buy an empty travel tin and you can fill it with your own pans of paint. This is one that I built myself with all of my favorite colors that I use the most often. And it also has the fold out lids with the palettes for mixing your own colors. These travel palettes are really nice. They come with a ring you can slip your finger through if you want to hold your palette while you're working, so that you can hold on to it securely. When shopping for watercolor palettes, know that they do come in many different shapes, colors, and sizes. And what I am teaching you today works with any type of watercolor palette that you find. For this lesson, I will be using my favorite palette, which is the one that I built myself with all of my favorite colors. Now let's set up our watercolor space and get ready to paint. I have 2 mugs which I fill with water, and I place them on a washcloth to catch any drips as I'm working. I like to have 1 cup of water for clean water that I can bring to activate my paints, and I like to use another cup for rinsing my brush out. That way I can continue to paint and I have 1 clean and 1 for dirty, and I don't have to constantly be refreshing my water while I work. If you find yourself using dirty water, that dirty water is going to color your paints and cause them to be dirty as well. Before we begin watercoloring, it's very important to activate your paints. I like to use this little spray bottle just full of plain water, and I spritz my paints about 5 or 10 minutes before I begin painting. When you do this, the water will soak down into the dried paints and activate them. This will encourage the paints to come up easily into your brush when you begin painting, and you will get vibrant colors. If you are dipping your brush into a dry pan of paint, the colors are not going to lift in the same way, and they will be more dull. When you get started, you're first going to want to wet your brush. You need to have water in your brush to invite that color into the bristles. Now let's spend a minute to look at some brush technique. Using my round brush, I am placing it on the side of the bristles and dragging it across long ways to create a thick line. Now let's take a look at that from another angle. You can see that I'm holding the brush towards the paper, but placing the bristles down flat. Let's try that one together one more time. Place your bristles down flat and drag them across the page. Next, we'll be creating a slightly thinner line by holding the brush in a different way. We held the brush like this for a thick line. Now we're going to turn it the other direction, drag it along to make a thinner line. Let's take a look at this from another angle. We're still pressing the bristles down flat and dragging them across the page, but we are holding the brush a different way than we did before. This is how we held it for a thicker line, and this is how we'll hold it for a thinner line. Let's look at that from a different angle one more time. Now, as we are working with different colors through this experiment, I want to make a note to you to notice how thorough I am being in making sure that my brush is clean as I go from dark colors to lighter colors. Now I'm going to teach you how to make the thinnest line possible with this round brush, using the tip of the brush. To make thin, delicate lines, you're going to want to hold the brush pointing straight at the paper, and I like to use my hand to support the brush and make as light of a touch on that paper as possible. I showed you that very quickly, so let's go ahead and look at that again. You're going to want to brace the brush against your hand and use your hand to keep the brush as light as possible on the page. Here is a look at that angle closely one more time. Let's quickly review what we just learned. You're going to hold the brush flat against the page to make a thick line, turn the brush the other direction, flat against the page for a thinner line, and perpendicular to the page with the very tip of the point to make a thin line. Now we're going to practice loosening up our wrist and allowing ourselves to have fun creating shapes with our brush. I want you to start by holding the brush perpendicular to the paper and just making a fun little wave. Now I want you to start moving more freely and just allow your wrist and your hand to move in whichever ways makes you happy. As we begin to create our geodes, you're going to want to have a loose wrist and allow yourself to have freedom of motion and movement. You'll see that I used small motions to make little curly cues, and now I'm loosening up and allowing myself to take up the whole page. This is a freedom of choice that is entirely up to you and dependent upon the size of the paper that you have purchased. If you're enjoying this activity, please pause the video and spend a little bit of time just loosening up your wrist, warming up your muscles, and allowing yourself to get comfortable just moving your brush freely on the page. Remember that exercises like this do not need to create amazing pieces of work. They are solely for your exercise and exploration. Now let's take a look at the example that I created for you of the type of geodes we're going to be creating together today. Geodes specifically are such a really fun activity as we begin exploring shape in watercolor. In nature, the shapes that natural geodes come in are absolutely endless, and that's why this is the perfect creation to practice loosening up and having fun. Now, as we begin, the first thing you want to do is get your brush wet and choose a color. In this lesson, we will be creating lots of little shapes on one page, and after you have completed the lesson, you can choose a larger paper, smaller paper, note cards, whatever it is that you want, and just have fun creating geodes of every shape and size. For the sake of the lesson together, we're going to make 5 different geodes, small and large, with our first color that we have chosen. Now let's take a look at this from another angle. As I'm creating my geode, I am holding my brush perpendicular to the page and using the technique that I taught you to create the thinnest, smallest line with the tip of the brush. Now, the very fun part about exploring these geodes is changing the amount of pressure that you put on the tip of that brush as you go around and create your shape. When you press harder, you can create a thicker line, and when you lessen the pressure, you can create a thinner line. And so as you go around and create these geode shapes, you can change also the thickness and thinness of the lines that you're creating, which will add a lot of interest and are very fun motor skills to explore. So after we have created 5 shapes, some small and some larger, with our first color that we chose, we're now going to choose a secondary color. On the larger shapes that I created, I am putting my second layer of paint and color on the inside. And on the smaller shapes that I created, I am putting the secondary color that I've chosen on the outside. There is no rule or reason about why I am doing this. I am simply doing it to create variation and to have fun exploring. Now, as we continue to choose new colors and create more layers in our geodes on the inside or the outside, you'll notice that wherever you touch your new row to the row that you painted before, the colors might bleed together. This is the wet and wet technique in watercolor, which is one of the most fun and therapeutic, cathartic, and interesting things to watch. When you're laying down a fresh color of paint and it touches another one that is still wet, there's a boundary on the paper that is broken, and the colors will bleed into each other, creating very fun effects. Now, part of what makes creating these geodes very fun is when you take control of this technique, the wet and wet technique, and you choose to allow those layers to touch in some places and to not touch in other places. So you can see that as I'm creating my geode, in some spaces there is white space between the layers of paint, and in other spaces I am letting them bleed together. You'll notice also that as I'm creating my layers within each geode, that I am not following the exact shape that I started with. As you build layer upon layer, you can change the shapes as you go, adding variation in the thickness and thinness of the lines, and also adding bumps and curves to create interest with every single layer. If you have on hand some shimmer paints made usually with mica powder, which is a natural mineral that shines, then adding in some layers of that sparkly mica can really add beauty to your paintings of geodes. Now I am choosing another color palette to play with some new shapes. You can see that I created a few small and a few large shapes, which I am filling in as we did before. And we will continue to create layers upon layers while remembering to loosen our wrist and allow our hands and our fingers to move freely, as well as exploring creating new shapes, which sometimes can be difficult. We also have the opportunity to explore colors that go together. For these examples that I am creating for you, I am sticking within color families. So we created a blue set of geodes with everything from sky blue to indigo, and now I'm moving on to using lots of shades of purple. If you are working with a palette of paints that is more limited in colors than mine is, you can have fun mixing colors to make darker and lighter colors. Try mixing in blue to a green to create a darker green, or mixing purple in with yellow to create a brown. Mixing your own colors is as fun as every other part of watercoloring. Now I want you to take what I have taught you so far and have fun painting along with me and getting creative, loosening up that wrist and seeing what you can create, what colors you can mix, and which color combinations you're going to put together. Now I'm going to put on some music for your enjoyment while we paint along together. Listen to the music and let yourself feel the movement that it invites you to have. Congratulations! You have completed Watercolor Geode's Exploration of Shape. I hope that this lesson has given you confidence and has helped you to feel empowered in your creativity. Now you get to explore all shapes, sizes, and colors of watercolor geodes.